Lynched on CTV, proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88 at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled. Good evening. A strong warning from a terrorism lecturer. New Zealand could become a target of ISIS if we get involved in the crisis in the Middle East. Tonight, Dr. Greg Newbold is my guest, and Lynched starts right now. Good evening, thank you so much for your company tonight. Well, a criminologist says the raids against terrorists in Australia shows that ISIS can show up anywhere, anytime, and even in New Zealand. The Prime Minister continues to flirt with the idea of sending our troops to the Middle East, but what are the dangers of doing that in this country? Dr. Greg Newbold is my guest, and he joins me now. Good evening to you.
Hi, Chris.
Thank you so much for your time this evening, really appreciate it. You have been warning for a couple of weeks now that if we do get into bed with the Americans, we do run the risk of potentially being a target for ISIS. Can you explain exactly what you mean by that?
Well, our chances of being targeted by ISIS are enhanced if we're seen to be assisting the American effort, but I don't think that's a reason for not doing it. The chances of ISIS expanding are greater if everyone sits on their hands and doesn't pull their weight, then ISIS could run riot. We fought in the First World War and the Second World War to assist our allies and against a common evil, and I think we need to do that now in relation to ISIS. But nonetheless, that makes us a target. It doesn't mean we're not a target. If we don't do it, doesn't mean we're not a target, because any aircraft that's flying between here and the United States or here in Australia could legitimately be a target irrespective of our position.
Doctor, I was absolutely staggered with those images that we saw, it only seems about a month ago now, of the Australian Federal Police, about all 800 of them, getting stuck into some of those houses in various parts of Brisbane and Sydney. It was just remarkable scenes, and to think that it was just on our doorstep, to think that this is happening in Australia, would we be naive to think that these types of raids won't eventually happen in our country? What do you see in this?
Well, if you remember back in the 80s, the team policing units dawn raids on Pacific Island overstays, we've already had a precedent there. It could easily happen again, and I wouldn't have a problem with it as long as they're acting with good reason and with good suspicion. I mean, the raids against the Polynesian overstays were right over the top, but this is a different thing altogether. And so, yeah, I think we could easily see a situation where raids might be necessary on terrorist suspects. They'd have to do better than they did at the Urewera.
They would, wouldn't they? That was an absolute shambles, to be fair.
Shambles for them, yeah.
Do you believe that there are ISIS sympathisers in New Zealand, even perhaps here in Christchurch?
Very likely. You couldn't say one way or another, but it's very likely and highly probable, I think, that there are ISIS sympathisers, and highly probable. We've already had one person killed, I think, over there, who went over to...
Who was a New Zealander?
He was a New Zealander. Yeah, I think there are probably others too. Just depends on how far they're prepared to go, but there are definitely extremist Islamic elements in New Zealand, which are a very small minority of the Islamic community, most of whom are peace-loving. But within that group, just within any religious group, Christians, you get extremists amongst the Christians as well. So yeah, I'm sure there would be.
The sad thing about all of this is the fanatics now are not just those from a small minority of Islamic groups. We're now talking about white Caucasian men, even teenagers. There's the recent case of what's been dubbed, they're calling him the ginger jihadist. We're talking about a young teenage boy from West Sydney. He goes fishing, and all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, he goes missing. He turns up on television, on international news. There he is there, declaring war around the globe, declaring war against his own Prime Minister. In your view as a criminologist, are we talking here about a young boy with a criminal mind, or are we talking about somebody who is just so dispossessed from society, they feel the need that for whatever reason, he's become attracted to this crazy group? What do you see in this when you see this young chap? By all accounts, was a pretty normal looking chap.
Yeah, I see what we used to call a crazy mixed up kid. He's a teenager, he's a little, just a little kid who's got sucked into this whole drama and the spectacle of ISIS. I mean, you've got a couple of young girls who've gone over and married ISIS fighters. You know, that'll be the worst mistake they've ever made. But you've got these young people, they do all sorts of things. Young people, you know, they join gangs or they get involved in different things. The Roastbusters, for example. You know, young kids do crazy things sometimes. When I was in jail, the big thing was an Anandamaga. And there were a bunch of young guys who joined the Anandamaga. You know, they thought the Anandamaga was going to give them some sort of identity and purpose in life. And that's what they do. They join these things, gangs or sects, in order to get themselves identity, notoriety, and a sense of life purpose when they're feeling lost and lacking in direction.
The trouble is, you talk about people who feel, you know, they need a sense of identity, notoriety, they want somebody to aspire and look up to. But gee whiz, looking up to ISIS, now that takes mongrel mob gangs to the very next level, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
That's concerning.
Make the mongrel mob look like Christians.
Well, don't they? Yeah. Compared to ISIS.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, look at in the United States, how many young kids bring guns to school and commit mass murders. It's the same kind of thing, a crazy reaction by young kids who in a mental state of mind, you know, a crazy state of mind.
So, in your view, as a criminologist, can we separate the difference between an extreme criminal who commits a criminal act and a terrorist? At the moment, do you see Mr. Ginger Guy here as a terrorist or just a young guy who's lost his way and for whatever reason thinks the ISIS people are his new Jesus Christ? Yeah,
I mean, they're just young kids without a purpose in life, who's found a purpose in his life and it's on TV and he's joined up with this group. He could easily have joined a gang if a gang had been available to take him in. You know, Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Oklahoma building in a decade ago.
And isn't it interesting?
Another crazy young guy.
Isn't it interesting? We never thought of that as an act of terrorism. We thought of it just a bombing by an absolute loony.
Yeah.
Does the word terrorism take it to the next level, though?
Well,
because he committed an act of terror.
It was an act of terror. It was a terrorist act, and he belonged to an extreme right-wing group. You know, that's the recruiting ground. You know, the recruiting ground for this type of activity is the young, solitary male who hasn't got a lot of friends and who's looking for direction in life. Look how many of them joined up to fight in the First World War. Most of them didn't know what they were going over to fight for. They didn't know anything about the issues. They just joined up because it was the thing to do. We need to take a break. When we return, we'll discuss issues more locally at home, including the doctor's thoughts on the Roastbusters case. How can these guys simply get out of jail card? Plus, gangs in Christchurch, are they still a problem? Stay with us.
Kids Television is right here on CTV. With an exciting range of kids programming, join in on all the fun, Saturday 7 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. right here on CTV.
Welcome to Caltex Redwood. We're a family-owned business proudly supporting our local community. We're open 24/7 for fuel and shop goods, and we have an amazing team of people ready to help you. Save at least 6 cents per litre using AA Smart fuel cards. We also offer great value on our LPG bottle fills. We have a full workshop and Bridgestone Tyre Centre. Our mechanics and tyre technicians will get your car sorted. Caltex Redwood, we're just down from St Bede's on Main North Road. Caltex Redwood, what drives you? Kickoff is pure football heaven, featuring all the games, the goals, the interviews and the stats. Kickoff, Sunday at 1:30 p.m, right here on CTV.
Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is criminologist Dr. Greg Newbold. Doctor, in terms of the Roastbusters case, last week it came out in the media that no charges would be laid simply because of lack of evidence.
Yeah.
I suspect there was probably a bit of puffery from these guys. But what do you see in this? I mean, a lot of outrage at no conviction here, a lot of outrage at no prosecutions. They did say some pretty compelling stuff about getting girls drunk and all this sort of stuff. But once again, it comes down to the simple fact: her word against their word against his word, and it's evidence. The police have said there was simply no evidence. What do you make of that?
Well, they have to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, and a person's word against someone else is enough to convict in this country, and there have been cases where people have been convicted solely on the word of a complainant. But when the police will have investigated this very, very thoroughly, and they would have looked at what evidence they had very, very carefully. And there's a huge catalogue of cases where women have made sexual complaints against men and then found to have been lying as a result of CCTV evidence or video recordings or telephone recordings. And we don't know what else they've got. You know, you might get a girl making a complaint, but then if she's got text messages and if there's video evidence, maybe one of the little cameras, telephone cameras, indicating that her story's not true, well, it's not going to stand up in court. And she won't want to go to court if that video evidence and that text evidence is going to come before the court, so she'll withdraw a complaint. If the police had grounds to charge those kids, I'm damn sure they would. The fact is, from what it appears, they haven't got the kind of evidence that would stand up in court, and they haven't got the witnesses who can stand up to scrutiny from defence counsel. So
sadly, in one way, I suppose you could say it's a double-edged sword. Perhaps police were doing the young girl in this case a favour by saying, well, all this stuff could come out that's not going to paint a particularly nice light. But having said that, though, I think the whole Roastbusters case did highlight perhaps the sexual culture we have in New Zealand, for better or worse. Now, I know they were found, well, not guilty because there was no case. But having said that, though, the overall crime stats, as you're probably well aware, they seem to be on the decrease, but one offence that is going up in this country is of a sexual nature. It's the sex crimes. Yeah. In your view, why is that?
I don't know. In fact, I'm writing a book at the moment about crime in New Zealand, and I've been looking at those stats, and what I've said in the book, I can't explain it. You can't explain it. We know that a large proportion of cases that come before the courts are historic cases. So just because there's a peak in any one year doesn't mean there's been a peak in offending that year, because some of those cases, some of those complaints would have related to incidents which took place 2, 4, even 10 years before. But we haven't got any data on that, how many of them are historic. Certainly more women are coming forward and laying complaints, and that's where those statistics come from, though, complaints received by the police. People are more likely to come forward and lay complaints, but I don't know why in the past couple of years so many more people have come forward with complaints.
Let me put this to you. Do you think in part that could be due to the fact that perhaps there's more confidence in the police force now, that if one police officer is seen to be wrong or there's a culture that's bad, the media can get hold of it and shake it so hard now, the bad news stuff, that there was that mentality, police looking after their own. Do you think that's changed? Has public confidence in the police got better, and therefore women are feeling more comfortable about saying, I was assaulted back in such and such year?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot more confidence in the police now, and there's been a raft of legislation changes to the Evidence Act and so on since the late 1990s, which make it much easier for a woman to come forward. She's not allowed to be cross-examined on her sexual history, for example. She doesn't have give evidence at depositions and so on. There's a lot of legislative changes being made which make it easier for women to come forward, and there's a lot of confidence in the police. The police now are very careful to be sensitive with sexual complainants.
And of course there's more police women officers that are dealing with these cases too, which I suppose helps.
Yes, and they have there are dedicated personnel whose job it is to make sure the police toe the line as far as this sensitivity is concerned. So I think more people are coming forward. The fact that we have an increase in sex complaints in the last 24 months, I don't think is a reflection of an increase in actual sexual assaults. I think it's an increase in people's willingness to come forward and make complaints. That's interesting.
Police often put out I think, half-yearly results. In Christchurch it seems to be okay. Do you buy the stats that suggest crime, generally speaking, in this country is on the decrease, or do you think there's pressure on from the top dogs in Wellington saying, can you make sure those stats look nice? What do you reckon? Do you reckon it's a bit of both?
No. I think there's crime rates peaked in New Zealand in the early 1990s. They peaked in America in the late 1980s. We're always about 5 years behind. They've been declining in the United States since the late 80s. They've been declining in New Zealand since the early 90s. Violent crime murders peaked in 1993. Most violent crimes peaked in the early 90s and have been dropping. And of course, property crime, which is the big driver of crime rates, with about 50% of all complaints relate to property theft and misappropriation, property damage.
This is all sounding quite positive.
And that's
Greg.
all dropping. A lot of it's dropping because of things like better security. People don't carry money around on them. There's not so much money lying around houses. Televisions aren't worth anything anymore. Why would you go and steal one?
Well, that's true.
So those kinds of things drive property down. There's better security. But there's also there are increases in fraudulent activity, identity theft and that kind of thing, which
with the rise of social media.
Yeah, and a lot of time you get ripped off. You can be ripped off electronically and not even know about it. So I wouldn't say that crime rates are necessarily dropping. It's just reported crime, the conventional crime that we normally know about and lay complaints about is dropping. But some areas of crime, like white-collar crime, definitely aren't dropping.
Yeah, so technology is changing the way crime is.
Yeah.
We need to take a break. Still to come, gangs in Christchurch. Stay with us.
Southern Newsweek is an Otago-based news bulletin. Watch this every week to stay in touch with what's happening in and around your community. Stay in the know with Southern Newsweek, 11 a.m. Saturdays, right here on CTV.
Looking for that perfect gift for a loved one? Wanting to add some vibrance to your home? Or just looking to brighten up your workplace? No matter the occasion, the Hitching Post has something for everyone. Lose yourself in their extensive range of homeware, art, glass and plasma cut metalwork. The Hitching Post is your one-stop shop for great style and quality. So come on down to the Hitching Post, 722 Marshland Road.
Located at the foot of the Port Hills, Pyramid Golf offers a spectacular location for any occasion. Make a dream wedding a reality with private use of our green function room, outdoor garden courtyard, large marquee and stunning gazebo. Or for your next conference, enjoy the relaxed atmosphere of Pyramid Golf, offering a private, spacious conference room with special deals to make any break a true break. All with customised catering from the Wow Cafe. Pyramid Golf, 50 Pyramid Park Drive, right next to the Pyramid Heritage Park.
Welcome to Caltex Redwood. We're a family-owned business proudly supporting our local community. We're open 24/7 for fuel and shop goods, and we have an amazing team of people ready to help you. Save at least 6 cents per litre using AA Smart Fuel cards. We also offer great value on our LPG bottle fills. We have a full workshop and Bridgestone Tyre Centre. Our mechanics and tyre technicians will get your car sorted. Caltex Redwood. We're just down from St Bede's on Main North Road. Caltex Redwood. What drives you?
Join me, Jude Kirk, every weekday as I share with you some of the best shopping in Canterbury.
Welcome back to Lynched on CTV. My guest tonight is Dr. Greg Newbold. Doctor, let me ask you about police and guns. Every time there is a shooting, whether it's from police or a perpetrator or offender, the Police Association comes out so fast to say this is why police should be armed 24/7. What is your take on this? You for or against officers carrying guns?
Well, this is one of Greg O'Connor's hobby horses.
Babies.
Yeah, he loves it. You know, Greg will jump up and down. I know Greg. He's a friend of mine. I like him, but he wants to arm the coppers. You know, and I don't agree with it. I don't agree with arming cops. At the moment, police have access to firearms. They carry firearms in their vehicles at night, in their glove boxes. They do have firearms. They just don't carry them on their hips, and they're locked in a box. So if they open that box, then they have to write a report on it. I think that's the way it should be. If you have cops walking around the bloody streets with guns on their hips like cowboys, they'll start acting like cowboys, and we've seen that in the United States. We've seen it in Australia. We get arrogance and shoot first and ask questions later problems. We've got problems already with the use of tasers and mace. There've been abuses where those are concerned, but they're not fatal. Where a gun comes out, the pulling of the gun, firing a trigger is quite often fatal. So a mistake can be fatal, and you don't want that. We don't want innocent people dying.
That's the danger that I have with this too. I mean, how many times do you go on YouTube or the international news, in particular, look at some of the American states, and there's a police officer that's got trigger happy, he's shot dead an innocent, a black guy, and as you say, the questions have been raised later. It just seems like, do you believe, the other argument for not having guns, for police not having guns, is that would just create more of a gun community among criminals. They would get gun happy too. They'd try and arm themselves with what police are arming themselves. Do you buy into that?
No, I don't think that would necessarily happen. But what it would breed is arrogance. At the moment, with the police in their general duties, the way that cops act at night, when they're patrolling the streets in town, they're normally pretty nice people. They're pretty friendly, they're polite, and they try to get on with everyone. And they're completely different from the coppers I've come across in the United States, and I've been out police riding in the United States, where the cops are arrogant thugs. They've got guns, and you'd better call them sir or else, because I've got a gun and I can shoot you. And they do, and it alters the whole policing dynamic. I like polite policemen. I don't like arrogant policemen. And that's what you get when you get a gun. Another thing that would also be the case, if the police were carrying guns, they'd all need to take off a day a month for target practice. So you talk about police numbers, not having enough police. Well, you can reduce that by a day a month, because they'd all need to have target practice. You don't want coppers walking around the streets with guns they don't know how to use and can't shoot straight.
Do you think our police force is under-resourced, or is that a myth that people like to say just because you can?
Well, it's like how long's a piece of string, really? How much are they under-resourced? Are they over-resourced? Well, in relation to what? I don't think that you can answer that question objectively. The police will say they're under-resourced, but then you've got to weigh that against other expenses, hospitals. You know, we haven't got, the government hasn't got unlimited amount of money to spend.
Bring in the nurses, yeah.
Yeah.
Nearly out of time. I want to move on now to Christchurch gangs. I'm always surprised at the amount of media releases I get through the inbox at Newstalk ZB saying there's been a P bust in relation to a gang. It feels like to me I'm getting more and more of these media releases unless police are just being more friendly with the media. What do you see? Are gangs still a problem in Christchurch today as they were in the late 90s in terms of the criminal behaviour, that kind of aspect? Or have they got better? Because I can't think of a gang.
Gangs got a really low profile now. And, you know, in the 1990s there was a problem with the gangs because they were shooting at each other. But the gangs have never really been a problem. The gangs have been just something that the media jump on and the police get worried about. But the average person isn't under any threat from the gangs at all. I mean, you just don't see them. The average person is not going to be harmed by a gang member.
I suppose some of the gangs. What is a gang, though? I mean, are we talking about youths that hang around Eastgate McDonald's and threaten you and say take money? Or are we talking about mongrel mob members?
Even patch gangs. So I haven't seen a patch gang and member in Christchurch for months. And if I have, well, they've been riding around and minding their own business. And no problem for me. Or anyone else that I know of. You know, I mean, so there is something, especially up in Auckland, there is certainly the case that gangs are involved in manufacturing methamphetamine. But they're not the only ones. I mean, if you take the gangs out of it, doesn't mean there won't be any meth. Someone else will do it.
There was that recent bust in Avondale, and I was talking to you about this off here, and I was really surprised. A sleepy, nice suburb I grew up in, and to hear of a P bust in there, it really shook me. I thought, you know, and we're talking people in their early 20s, for example.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a P problem still? I know this was such a big deal in the early 90s, the late 90s, early 2000s. Or is P becoming sort of it's too hard now, in the hard basket?
Well, methamphetamine is a drug that causes a lot of damage if you overuse it. But is it a problem? Well, alcohol's a big problem. Alcohol's a far greater problem than methamphetamine. In fact, I was out with the police. Methamphetamine is just a pitty little problem.
It's funny you say that. I was out with the police myself in an iCar a couple of months ago, and they said to me, Chris, if alcohol was banned in this country, we would be out of a job.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
60% of all violent incidents are alcohol related.
Amazing, isn't it?
Most of domestic violence is alcohol related.
We're out of time. I've really enjoyed you coming on the program, Dr. Greg Newbold. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And that is our show. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week. Lynched on CTV was proudly brought to you by Christchurch's #1 dining offer, Sequoia 88, at the Redwood Hotel, a food concept unequalled.